about the next step in the evolution of the Discovery Walk project. The request before you today is to authorize Discovery Walk construction bids documents to include the add alternatives or the optional features of Discovery Walk, and ultimately to direct our EDA and city staff to present findings and recommendation at our next regular meeting.
So I'm sorry, I did say it isn't an action item, but in fact we do ask you to take action to allow us to go out to bid. So my apologies.
So I should note that the board, this board in November approved the design for Discovery Walk. So we've been acting with you in concert on a number of steps along the way. The addition of the add alts, the community shelters, and the snow melt have been discussed at prior meetings of our DMCC board here, the City Council and EDA board, and we've been advised to take them here so they can be added into the bid packages. The timeline for this project, there's been 3 years of community input, probably more than that, dating back to at least 2017, that have led us to a point here now where we're going for approval to go to bidding. If all goes well, we anticipate that construction would begin in early June. Next slide, please. Thank you. So just a reminder that the Discovery Walk project is not operating in a vacuum. It is functioning, and it will be operating within a larger system of connectivity. We have the Discovery Walk project that's running north-south through the middle of the slide there in green, but it ties in with the Heart of the City project. It connects up with the bus rapid transit line, which is being planned, and it connects the Annenberg Plaza, which is really that Mayo Building, Plummer Building Plaza space down to Soldiers Field. So this is part of a larger system of connectivity in creating that walkable, vibrant downtown Rochester. Excuse me. This is also being developed within the context, larger context of economic development. If you transition to the next slide, please. And yes, this will add to the vibrancy and livability of downtown Rochester, but this is also an area that has seen and will continue to see significant economic development over the past few years, and going forward with the addition of the 1 and 2 Discovery Square buildings, new residential units, and the Kellen building that Doug Holton mentioned earlier. So this is just one more piece of the puzzle, and we believe that adding the Discovery Walk project in here will spur further development in this area. Next slide, please. From a design perspective, we've had a lot of conversation over the last couple of years in this group and others about the design detail. What we're really looking to do is create a transformative process and a transformative experience block by block. If we look at this, starting at the south end and moving to the north end, the 500 block, which is down where it touches up to 6th Street Southwest, the corner of People's Food Co-op, we really see that as, we sometimes describe that as the village. It's ripe for development on at least one side, and we see that as a gathering place that's sort of at that entrance into Soldiers Field Park. As we move northward to the 400 block, this is outside the 1 and 2 Discovery Square buildings, we sometimes find ourselves referring to this as the office or the outside office, with a place to sit and gather, but also for having those outside meetings and conversations. And then moving further north to the 300 block, this is where we see food trucks gathering. We see this as a place for people to get food and to connect with each other, sometimes calling this the cafe block, if you will. Next slide, please. And so investing in that experience means investing in infrastructure to support that. That includes adding seating, landscaping, public space, trees, and the weather shelters, or the community shelters as we refer to them now. But there's quite a bit of investment in what would become not just a place to go through, which is really what 2nd Avenue is right now, but as Discovery Walk, it becomes a place to go to rather than just a place to go through. Next slide, please. Also, a lot is happening underneath the ground. As we've heard in the past, as much as we need to invest in the experience above ground, there is even greater investment needed in the underground services, excuse me, duct banks, stormwater structures, sanitary sewer lines, chilled heated water, and the like. So it's much like an iceberg. Much of what you see is above ground, but much of what is happening more so is below ground. Next slide, please. We've also invested in a significant amount of community engagement in this process, not only with the more traditional open houses and workshops that were held pre-COVID, but also by bringing the community co-designers into this process. There was a nice write-up in the Post Bulletin yesterday about the process of the community co-design. And then the community artists, these are all local artists, their work has been embedded within the project itself. And I think this project really has represented a continuing maturation and refinement of how we engage the community. The co-design approach has been incorporated into the bus rapid transit system, and we've really seen that being a staple of how we engage the community going forward. Next slide. Then to focus on the optional additions that we've referred to, and these are the items we'd like the board to consider including in the bid packages. One is the community shelters. We have a budgeted figure there of $2.17 million. And coming from our co-designers, Jenny, what she tells us is, the benefits of social connection and physical and emotional well-being. Our social gatherings have changed. Flexible outdoor gathering spaces have become more important values. It would be tempting to think of these as just weather shelters, a place where you can duck in out of the weather, but they're really more than that. This is really a place of gathering and fellowship as much as it is a place to get out of the weather. They do include heating elements as designed right now and cooling elements, as well as protection from rain and snow. And then the snow melt is a second optional addition that has been included here, and this would be snow melt along the full length of Discovery Walk on both sides. And Krista, who is another one of our community co-designers who uses mobility aids, she brings her perspective of the snow melt benefits, just in terms of inclusive and accessible design elements being important to people who use mobility aids. There was another option that came about as part of the community engagement processes that we had followed, the extension into Soldiers Field. It was not part of the original scope of the project. As you may recall, it touched 6th Street, but did not cross the street and go into Soldiers Field. But through the community engagement process, we learned that there was a lot of interest in expanding this into Soldiers Field. We believe that's best to be included in the Soldiers Field master planning, and so it's not part of the adult package that we would like you to consider taking into the bid process. Next slide, please. Just a reminder, this is the request we're bringing to the board. The authorization to include those adults in the construction bids and to bring our findings back for consideration at the next meeting. I'll close it here. Take questions.
Thank you, Chris. And Allison, you can drop the slide deck, I think.
Can I start with a question? We've talked about priorities between projects. If I characterize my priorities on this project, I love the idea of expanding to Soldiers Field. And in fact, we talk a lot about how we can extend out from the core of the city. I really think more of our opportunity is to extend in from a very green city that gets very ungreen once you get to the center of it. And so I love the idea of bringing that forward, but I'm willing to sacrifice that, or snow melting, or shelters, or anything, if it means that we have to set priorities to have what I consider the most important moment on Discovery Walk, which is the second you get off that transit on 2nd. It has to be a way to get very quickly into a climate control. If we don't get that moment right, our transit goals fall apart, our congestion, our parking, everything else matters. So I don't see anything here about how we begin Discovery Walk at 2nd. Where are we at this point on that?
Good question, Chair Ryback. The 2nd Street, 2nd Avenue connection point, I think, is what you're referring to, the corner of the blood bank there. The weather shelter, community shelter experience would begin right there with the overhang of the Hilton building along the length of the 200 block. We know from the studies that were done as part of the BRT project that projecting out the cost of a pedestrian tunnel the length of Discovery Walk would be something north of $30 million. And so getting that connectivity from one end to the other with 100% complete protection from the climate would have a sizable price tag to it, knowing that we don't need that 365 days a year. We need that substantially fewer than 365 days a year. And so that's why we're coming forward with this recommendation. I should note there was a comment in the chat. We did have the figures reversed. The snowmelt system figure was $2 million in the on the slide there that showed the cost figures for the two. I did have those two reversed in error.
I certainly don't envision we have a tunnel going under the street the whole way. In fact, I think that's counterproductive to getting the activity on the street. But I do think that moment you get off transit should be more than just an overhang. And we don't need to spend a ton of time on it here, but this is something that for several years I've been calling attention to, and I'm just concerned we are not delivering on the game-changing experience that's going to be the key to making the transit village work, the transit work, everything is about if they can get to Discovery Square on that, or Discovery Park. So I won't beat this drum any further, but if we're going out for bids, this is the moment to do it. Okay, so why don't I see hands of the mayor, Jim Campbell, council president, Pam Wheelock. Can I just take them in that order? Mayor, Jim, council president, mayor, and Pam. Go ahead, Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would say I agree with you about my personal desire to have had that connection to Soldiers Field. I was really excited when that was brought forward and that we could do that. But I think in discussion with the city council, there was less support for that right now due to costs. And that it was perhaps, not everybody agreed, but I certainly heard that for some of them, that there was interest definitely in having that protection and the melting for the reasons that were stated and more. One of the points that I think gets lost in this that I just want to kind of put on the record is that there are some who have talked about this as simply a sidewalk, and it is far, far from a sidewalk. It is an experience. It is a connecting the community to this space. It is connecting the Mayo Clinic to the park. There's so much about this, but there's also really the opportunity to create that along that whole 3 to 4 block area, really an attractive place for businesses to grow and develop. And I think that keeps getting lost in this, and I think we need to just call that out as well. So this is also making a space for that is attractive and that businesses will want to come because of all the pedestrian traffic during the day and throughout that will result. So just wanted to put that on there too.
Okay, thank you. Jim Campbell?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm a broken record on this one too. You've heard me say it before that there's one vacant lot between Hilton and Discovery Square 1. And you can get your blood drawn by getting in the Hilton building, by getting there through the subway. And my hope is that someday the subway, whenever the decision is made to what to do on that vacant lot, I'm hopeful that the subway can be continued from Hilton to Discovery Square 1.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Council President Carlson?
Sure, thank you. I wanted to reflect a little bit of what the city council talked about when we had this discussion, and the mayor mentioned that there wasn't current support for the Soldiers Field option. My reflection on that decision was that we, at least several of us on the council, would support integrating that with the Soldiers Field master planning, as Chris mentioned, so that there absolutely is support for tying the work together, but not trying to just infuse DMC into the one end of Soldiers Field, but really make it an integrated approach so it connects very seamlessly and have broader community engagement around that specific piece. So that was one quick thing. And then I know there are concerns, as the mayor said, about understanding those under the road costs and how that would potentially save the city dollars down the road as we look to updating that infrastructure. So that was one important understanding. And then also less so about the specific features, like the adults, but how the space will be used, both from a sort of active programming to passive engagement with pedestrians as really a place to draw people, and ideas around how to tie it to our historic preservation work or the wonderful history here in Rochester. So some of that that how to make the space most engaging and most beneficial to the community came up as our discussion. Within that broader, how do we decide to spend $20 million-ish on this without this broader understanding of what it means that we won't be able to fund down the road, like you and Pam have been talking about. So really pleased to hear that that's the discussion we're going to have better tools to assess.
Okay. Thank you. Pam Wheeler?
So, Mr. Chair, several of my points have already been made, so I won't repeat them. I would just say I think that there's generally a lack of appreciation that public infrastructure investments are economic development tools. And so I appreciate the comments about the synergy between private investment and public infrastructure investments. And I think as we consider this again down the road, I'd like to better understand what should or what could or what might be paid for through assessment financing as well. And then I would only say that time is important, the question of time, and there are only certain things that you can do when the street is all torn up, and there are things that you can do afterwards. So I would give a lot of attention to the things that really can only be done when you're rebuilding the street, and give that some emphasis, and be more open to the opportunity costs of making further investments now versus later, and would like to understand that opportunity cost issue a little bit better, since I'm evaluating kind of the level of investment we just made in the brick apartment project, and there are several of those rolled up in potentially into this. So thank you very much.
When you hear people talking about how important it is to coordinate what happens under the street, they've worked in municipal government. So, yes, thank you. So I got to, okay, yes, Paul. I got it started on a kind of a broad conversation about this. Actually, if I understand the resolution, we have a fairly tactical question we have to address. Patrick, can you help clarify the resolution? We've had a general discussion that I think sets a tone, and it's super helpful to hear all of this. We obviously need some more conversation on that. Patrick, the resolution, though, really should be about what's included in the bid package, right?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so the action that we're asking you to take is to support our going out for bids on the entire project, including the adults for the community shelters and the snow melt. And you are not asking, or we're not asking, and you're not authorizing spending on those adults at this time. We will be coming back to you and City Council, for that matter, in May, to have this sort of iterative conversation between the two bodies around this investment. So we're asking only to go out for bids, and want you to have your eyes wide open. It will include bidding on the snow melt and community shelters for a pending decision.
We're going to the smorgasbord, but we don't have to eat anything. Okay.
We'll move.
Do we have a second?
Second.